Good evening. Hi, if you guys could you grab a seat and we'll get started. Hello. Hi guys, thanks to you all for coming. We are going to talk about plastic waste this evening. This is the second time that I've moderated a panel put on by the lovely folks from the EU, and the last time was in 2019. And I have to tell you, it's only been 2 years, and yes, we're still in a terrible pandemic, but the plastics issue has moved ahead at the speed of light just in that period of time. I'll give you a couple of things to think about, and then I'll introduce you to our panelists and we'll get started. Probably the biggest news is there's a whole collection of new reports that have come out that have come up with some pretty astonishing and depressing figures about where we are with plastic. Pew joined forces with Systemic, which is based in London, and they came up with a report last fall about this time that by 2050 the amount of plastic waste in the ocean will have tripled if we continue on the path that we are on right now. There are other reports that are out. I brought a couple of them with me. One of them just came out, and it talks about the number of situations where you can connect plastic waste to climate change as a microcosm of the larger problem. There are other issues involving emissions that just was announced today. Plastic emissions starting from birth to death is on track to outpace coal emissions by 2050. So everybody has their work cut out for them. Tonight we are going to talk about rivers. Rivers is another big topic that has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of years, and we have Trey Sherard here with us from the Anacostia Riverkeepers, who will talk about a beach cleanup. When I first started covering this subject several years ago at National Geographic, there were a couple of reports that came out that said that rivers contribute 10 rivers, mostly in South Asia, large rivers such as the Yangtze and the Ganges, etc., contribute almost 90% of plastic waste to the sea. That has since been reanalyzed, and it's the new work that's come out has isolated 1,000 rivers as being the main contributors. The large rivers in Asia and Africa are still near the top of the list, but it's more smaller rivers that run through densely populated urban regions that are close to the sea. The number one example would be the Pasig in Manila. That's a part about rivers. And over here we have Mercedes García Pérez from the EU, who is going to talk about efforts to pass a global treaty on plastic. And before you all groan and fall asleep because treaties take forever, there's a lot of attention on this and a lot of support from industry because we have in the world no regulations for things such as what is the definition of a bioplastic, what is the definition of composting. Industry is very eager to see some uniform regulations passed. It will help places. You also see island nations in the Caribbean and elsewhere who receive a lot of plastic that floats ashore, and there's nothing they can do about any of that. So I think we're going to see some interesting discussions next winter in Nairobi, if that happens. I'm not sure if it's going to happen virtually or in person. The talks on a plastic treaty will progress, and that may help clarify a lot of things. So why don't we start with Trey, and you can tell us about your recent work and how rivers are playing a role in being the primary conveyors of plastic to the oceans.
Happily, thank you. So my name's Trey Sherard. I am the Riverkeeper at Anacostia Riverkeeper. I've seen a couple of y'all are friends, a lot of y'all are colleagues, a lot of y'all are strangers. So if we haven't seen you out at a cleanup yet, I look forward to seeing you at a cleanup. We've actually been very privileged this fall. I think has been the most frequent number of privately sponsored cleanups I've seen in 9.5 years of working with this Riverkeeper. And I came on 9.5 years ago to be the half of 1.5 staff at an organization to get us out of just advocacy and policy and into some boots on the ground, volunteer work, and organizing volunteer trash cleanups. Because the Anacostia River, just next door to where we are right now between Rock Creek and the Potomac, has the dubious distinction of being one of 3 bodies of water in the entire United States to have a pollution diet from the EPA, a TMDL, a total maximum daily load for trash. There's only 3 in the states, but they are an important tool. They help incentivize and make arguments for the government jurisdictions to then make arguments to ask for money to get things done on the ground. Some of those things here involve the installation and then management of trash traps. If you didn't know that there was a whole suite of different traps for trash, there are. The district has several different kinds because the Anacostia running through it has such a problem with trash. The note that you made about smaller rivers being a major contributor is important, and it's notable that the 3 TMDLs in the U.S. for trash are not the Mississippi River. They're not major rivers. The Anacostia River is 8.5 miles long on the map. It's 176 square miles. We were the second, following the LA River, which is a pretty small river running through the city. Short river because it's coming off of California, which is steep. And then hot on our heels, the Anacostia was just next door to the Baltimore Harbor. So those 3 waterways had such a significant problem with trash. You see pictures from just even 5 years ago, and after a thunderstorm, not a hurricane, just a thunderstorm, a big summer storm after a couple of dry weeks, you could almost walk across the Anacostia River, quarter mile, half mile in points, across trash to trash to trash. And so most of that trash, of course, is some flavor of plastic. So as we talk about rivers being the avenue for trash, the avenue for plastic, it's important to note that the rivers aren't the source of the plastic. The river is where the plastic becomes visible. The plastic is in the storm bins, the storm drains on the side of the sidewalks and the streets. The plastic is spread out as little tiny wrappers here, straws there, a bottle here, a cup there, and it's spread out across that 176 square miles of my watershed that I represent. But it's not visible to most people until you see a raft of it floating up and down the river. Especially in the last year, as we talk about the pandemic and COVID, we've had people knocking on our door, on our email, calling the office, suddenly alerted to the fact that there was trash on the Anacostia River because they had just met the river. They had just started recreating outside in their own backyard, and they discovered what a problem it is. And the problem it is today is nothing compared to the problem it was 5 years ago, which is nothing compared to the problem it was a couple years ago. But plastic, as a piece of that problem, is just going up and up and up. I can keep talking, so you let me know when you want to jump back in.
Let's chat for a minute about, not to be totally negative, let's talk about what are we going to do about this, which will allow us to segue into you. What you have to think about when you think about how are we going to fix this problem is the single most important fact to know about plastic is that virgin plastic, which is brand new plastic, is far cheaper to produce than collecting used plastic and recycling it and turning it into something else. That's why the recycling rates in the United States hover around 9%, and globally it's about 30, I think, right?
That's in the EU is 30.
EU is 30. And so we have a dysfunctional system that starts at the very beginning. And so the EU, which is probably the leading, organization in the world in terms of dealing with plastic waste, they've passed a lot of things which we're going to hear about in a minute, and they're way ahead of the United States. They have things like what is known as an extended producer responsibility, where the industry pays a tax that helps with the collection and disposal which could be remaking of plastic. Here, we don't do that. And so the recycling system in the United States cannot compete with virgin plastic. It's not financially viable. And we will see in federal legislation that's proposed here the idea of an extended producer responsibility. And I think you can use that and talk a little bit about some of the other things that are on the table, some of them for the first time in Congress this year.
Happily. So one of the biggest things to happen immediately before COVID, it was literally the last public event I went to before COVID, shut the doors on boat tours, it shut the doors on public events, outdoor events even. Very early in 2019, I attended that at the Capitol, the sort of a celebratory event, celebrating the introduction to both houses of the U.S. Congress of the Breaking Free from Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. Then of 2020, that has been reintroduced in this current Congress in both houses. So there's currently the Breaking Free from Plastic Pollution Reduction Act of 2021. And it is a giant bill. It realistically, even with the Congress we have, it's probably not going to pass as a whole because it does something that's just really devastating to plastic industry, which it connects the dots between extraction, refinement, and then the trash that we see on the street. A lot of people don't realize that every plastic bottle they see, with very few exceptions, is oil. They don't understand that any plastic you see is oil or gas. And so this bill connected the dots between extraction of fossil fuels, frontline communities whose lungs and their children are being harmed by the extraction and refinement of those oils and gases, with plastic. The bill, back into the sphere of what we usually deal with, talks about some rules for extended producer responsibility. It gets hard at single-use plastics, which is something the EU recently did really well on as well. Single-use plastics could be straws made out of plastic. It could be plasticware, forks, plates, cups. It could be styrofoam, especially for single, quick uses like takeout containers. That could be plastic bags. It could be balloons, which is one that doesn't get talked about as much. Just locally in the Chesapeake Bay, and specifically between Maryland and DC, there's been really good progress as far back as 12, 13 years ago in the district with bills targeted at single items. So a lot of the work that Anacostia Riverkeeper does, that a lot of other nonprofits in the district do, is actually funded by a 5-cent disposable bag fee. Most of those bags are plastic. Only a few of those are paper. And so that work includes money from the bag fee going to things like buying trash traps that catch plastic, to maintaining trash traps that catch plastic, to giving boat tours to show people all of the plastic that they haven't seen on the river, and connecting the dots for kids and adults alike about the fact that the plastic they saw on the ground before it rained is the same plastic that they're going to see on the river after it's rained. Those single-use plastics are a huge part of what we see legislation on across the U.S., not just in D.C., because D.C. is not technically a state. Technically, the first state to have a ban on styrofoam food and drink takeout ended up being between Maine and Maryland, depending on whether you want to count when the governor signed it or when the legislature passed it. D.C.'s had that for almost 5 years now, and it was an interesting fight. It speaks back to how some of the local level cleanups and volunteer work jumps back in with the advocacy and the policy piece. The DC Council hearing for styrofoam ban, the plastics lobby, the container lobby, pointed at the environmental side and basically just said they're lying. And that was it. That was their whole argument. When it came to Prince George's County and Montgomery County, who very quickly had county level bills put in, and this is a really good example of how the local jurisdiction bills can become state policy, and in some cases, like in Maryland with the microbeads ban, can actually almost immediately become federal policy. But in the counties, they had published a study which looked pretty good. They had a lot of good science stamped on it. But we had decades of volunteer data and trash trap data showing that there was, in fact, a problem with foam. That became a county ban in Montgomery County. 6 months later, it became a county ban in Prince George's County, Maryland. I think about 3.5, 4 years later, it became a Maryland General Assembly vote for a statewide ban in Maryland. COVID happened, and about 2 years after that vote, It is now implemented as a statewide ban in Maryland. But the policy piece is really where a lot of the changing of what kind of trash we can see gets done. And so one of the biggest things that we can hope for is for some kind of federal policy in the U.S. to match the single-use plastics ban that the EU did. And there's already that legislation in place in the Breaking Free from Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. If you live outside of DC and you actually have representation, by all means, please reach out to your representative, let them know you support it. Reach out to your senator, let them know you support it. And if, as it gets too big to pass, if certain parts can come out and be set up as new bills, bans on single-use plastics, a 10-cent national deposit for bottles, which works really well in the states that have it, but hasn't been implemented in a lot of other states in the U.S. All those things are really good policy pieces that we want to see come out. And it just speaks again to the importance of policy on this piece.
And now we want to hear from Mercedes, who can walk us through the elements of what the EU has done. The EU has led the way on plastics all the way through, and they have the member states have additional new things that they're working on to go even beyond where they are, which is far beyond most of the rest of the world. So Mercedes, why don't you walk us through that?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here, also those online. Thank you, Laura, for accepting to moderate again, and thank you, Trey, for the wonderful beach cleanup. We were really energized in the delegation to know that we had put together a ton of trash, literally, that I think that stayed in people's minds, and it helps us also with the work that we do at the policy level every day. So the scale of the problem in the EU is also very big. We have 145,000 tons of microplastics into the oceans. That's only microplastics. We have about 29 million tons of plastic waste every year. We're probably already at 30 because the data I have is from 2018. And that's 9% of the world's plastic output. Of that, 30% gets recycled in the European Union. 39% incinerated, and the rest, which is about 31%, ends up in landfills. So although we're a bit better and sort of a bit along the way, we still have a lot of work to do also in the European Union. And what we've discovered is that there is actually an economic case to be made for better recycling and for better management of our waste in general, and of course of our plastic waste as well. And that requires looking at the whole cycle, and that's why we decided to name this event The Life of Plastic, because you need to look at it upstream. You need to look at it from the moment you are designing the plastic, to design it in a way that is easier to recycle. Nowadays, a lot of the plastic that we use is you can probably recycle it through a very complicated industrial process, but it's difficult and therefore expensive, as Laura has explained very eloquently, and therefore it doesn't really get done. So looking at design that allows plastic to be more easily recyclable is one of the main things that we need to do. Obviously, using less plastic as well, and for that there are measures such as you have to pay a fee when you use a plastic bag, if at all, or you have to pay a fee if you use plastic that is not easily recyclable. Makes a big difference. And then there's a lot of research and innovation that is going into what is a better design for plastic, and of course there's all of the systems to determine what is biodegradable and what not, what you were referring to before, and that's a big question, of course, and one that the industry has a lot of interest in and that we are developing at the moment. What we're lucky, and we were talking about this with colleagues from the DC environmental authorities, is that we do have the consumers on our side in the European Union. When we ask about what they think about plastic and what they feel should be done, for example, 94% of them say that we should design better plastic that is easier to recycle. And they even say 61% of them say that they're ready to pay an extra charge for single plastic goods, and therefore for plastic that cannot be recycled. So in that, we're lucky that there is quite a lot of consensus among our citizenship that this needs to be tackled.
I want to go one bit before we open the floor to questions where we talk about some of the solutions that are out there. And one of the great examples that I've always loved about a sign of forward thinking by the EU is bioplastics is really coming on, and there are a lot of companies out there and a lot of companies that are trying to invent things. The consumer message is always, you know, this is just going to go away very quickly, don't worry about it. Much of that is not really true. I'm not going to condemn that industry or that science. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and I think we just need to keep watching it. But to that end, there was a plastic, oxo-plastic, which the EU actually banned. It's a biodegradable plastic that is one of the companies, one of the main manufacturers of it is in the UK. And so Plymouth University in 2015 took 5 plastic bags and buried them. Let's see, they buried one or two. They put a couple in the water because biodegradable things don't really biodegrade very well in cold water, and even tropical water counts as cold ocean water. And they buried an OXO bag, and 3 years later they dug it up and took it to the store and filled it with groceries and took it home, which really pissed off the company that manufactured the bags. But there was, you know, at the end of the day, there was the EU that said, well, this product is not really ready to be listed as truly biodegradable. And so I just cite that as an example of folks in the EU who are on top of things and watching things. What consumers can do is talk to your legislators, and here in Washington, I guess it's fair to say that may or may not have any effect. The main thing you can do is vote with your wallet. All of the companies that manufacture and sell goods that are wrapped up in plastic or packaged in plastic or so on are paying attention to this issue, and they're paying attention to their customers, because some of their customers are leaving and buying another product because it is packaged differently using less packaging. So they are taking note of that, and with that direct communication, you will be able to have more influence than you think. This is a problem that is not going to be solved by banning things only, by recycling only, by redesigning product only. It's a long list of things, all of which have to come together. If all of these elements are put together, there is optimism among the people who are doing the work that yes, we can get our arms around this problem. We should be able to tackle it. It's not as hard as climate change. So I'll open it up to the room. We'll take questions. In the back. Is there a microphone?
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's very inspiring and very interesting. So in Norway, we have this deposit and refund system for the bottles and cans. So now around 95% of all the cans and bottles are collected, and this is the producer responsibility. So people pay around 20 cents when they buy a bottle of Pepsi Cola, for instance, and they get that back. And they put it in a machine in the grocery store, and they can also choose to participate in a lottery by the Red Cross. They can win $100,000. So that's a very popular. So I also see in the United States there is a big ad going from Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola, and they say all bottles should come back. And do the industry in the United States, do they support this system of deposit and refund? Do you have a support from the industry?
No.
Well, wait. I'm going to be, in fairness to the industry, they have a slightly different problem than Trey is going to tell you, but reporters love irony. the industry is largely responsible back at the very beginning of when plastic packaging and plastic products began to be mass produced, which was around 1950. They managed to shove the cost and the responsibility for disposal of all of this off on you guys, consumers, instead of figuring out, well, we make this stuff, so we're going to figure out how to take care of it. So here we are 70 years later, and we have, as I mentioned, a dysfunctional recycling system and so on and so forth. And when the plastic issue topped out in the last couple of years in consumer surveys is as being one of the most important environmental issues in the view of in survey after survey, the industry sat up, and the bottling industry sat up and said, okay, well, we're going to, they all announced programs, we're going to recover X percent of the bottles out there, and we're going to remake them into bottles. Our new bottles are going to contain a certain percentage of recycled material, and everything's going to be really great. The problem with that is if all of the companies tried to meet their commitments, there aren't enough bottles being recovered for them to do that. So that's another problem that's unrelated to everything, but that is just another twist in the road that shows you that this is a pretty complex thing. Now I'm going to let Trey fill in the other half.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm going to mess up the count, so nobody quote me on the count, but I believe there are 5 and maybe 6 states in the United States that have a bottle deposit, ranging from 5 to 10 cents per bottle. And in the states where it is, it works. To the point that I went with an ex-girlfriend to meet her family in upstate New York, and I began to crumple a plastic bottle, because in my mind, it makes room for more bottles in the bag, makes it more efficient. And they all like jumped up to stop me, because they only get their deposit if the bottle is uncrumpled. But in every other state that doesn't have it, the industry, bottling industry, the American Chemistry Council, the beverage whichever association, there's 4 or 5 different industry funded groups to millions of dollars a year, spend those millions of dollars a year fighting bottle deposits and working to erode the bottle deposits that are already in place. And the same company that's based in the US, Pepsi is from my home state of North Carolina, Coke is from Georgia, and they say one thing in a market in Europe where they have to, and they say an entirely other thing here in the US where they can. And that's very worth noting, that these are the same companies. You know, they're different shells and different pieces, but it's the same company. And it speaks back to that need for the US to have federal level policy, because the market size, right? This is no longer talking about politics, this is talking about market share. And the US market share is giant. And we need this country to wield that as a tool instead of just giving it away for free like they do right now. We find our champions in cities and states, which is great, and it is appreciated. DC people, thank you in the back. But that's not how it should be. You know, the US should be doing more to protect its citizens from the pollution caused by these products, and it's really failing to do so. You know, those lobbyists that pointed at me and other environmentalists 6 years ago in the DC Council for foam and told the council that we were lying, those were paid for by the beverage and by packaging companies and this and that. So it's important to note how these same companies act in very different markets, and to overlay politics and market where you can.
Good evening, I'm Hamid Karimi. I work for the DC Department of Energy and Environment, and I've had the fun of working with Trey at the policy level here locally, and then had the privilege of working talking with Mercedes just an hour ago. I thought one of the reasons for this gathering is to exchange ideas and learn from one another. And I'm just wondering, looking at the European Union, being a bunch of countries that 70 years ago, they were at war with each other. And they are coming from a diverse political, economical, social background. they have been able to get to 31% recycling. It's not extremely high, but it's eons ahead of the United States, which is supposedly one country. And we heard from Trey that how successful partially we have been locally, but so how challenging it has been to pass policy federally. So I'm just thinking, asking Mercedes and perhaps even Trey to tell us how can we learn from the success stories you guys have had in Europe, and perhaps we can emulate some of that stuff here. Thanks.
You want to take a crack at that?
Very quickly, yeah, briefly. I think that, well, you have already. You've introduced a ban on plastic, on plastic bags, on single plastic. Well, so some of the measures that we see introduced in Europe are also being introduced at the local level here. I think the main difference, what we were discussing before, is that at the European Union we have the luxury of having very wide citizen support, so we can introduce this top-down. And what we do is what we call a directive, which is it's a law that says at the European Union level this is the objective we want to achieve, and then every member state has a bit the freedom to see how to implement it. And that allows us to still give our member states the last say in how to introduce the measures, but they can, we still reach the collective objective that we want to reach. And the other thought I will have is that there's the local level, the federal level, but I think this is a global issue. And one of the big objectives of the European Union is to get as much support as we can for a global treaty. Laura was saying before, the problem is in all of the big rivers all over the world, in small rivers. What we probably need is regulation that is applicable all over the world. And the opportunity will come next year in February. Has said there will be a meeting in Kenya of the UN Environmental Assembly, and that's when we want to see as much support as possible for an international treaty on plastics that will hopefully help solve these issues everywhere in the world and be a big step forward, I think, in tackling this issue globally.
My name is Andrew Stevens with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The speaker spoke a little bit about the EU Plastics Directive 2019. I was wondering if Mercedes could talk a little about what's coming next with packaging directive and
microplastics.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot coming up. We have, the European Union is very predictable because we publish all these things online. So we have our work program. I think it was published yesterday or the day before yesterday, so we know what's coming up. There will be at least 3 proposals on microplastics to regulate them, sometimes to prohibit them, because in some cases they're not really needed, and also to better study their effect on our health and the health oceans and the fish we eat, etc. So that's coming up in 2022. We are also, in our circular economy action plan, we are looking at biodegradable plastic and what that exactly means. So far, for example, we have considered in the European Union that plastic is plastic, and among single-use plastic, we have included also the ones that have some content of plastic, and some which is not, so that some industries are considering that biodegradable plastic, but as I was saying before, that not easily degradable, especially in the marine environment. So those are the measures that we are looking into and will come up in the next months.
How about right here?
My name is Christina Kussman, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Brothers One Plastic. And so my question is for you, Mercedes. I don't know if the audience is aware because we mostly live in a city, and we don't really know where our food is coming from. And actually, the farmers using and have to use tons of plastic, mulch, and tubings to grow the fruits and vegetables. But unfortunately, those plastic gets burned or left by the fields, and is not even taken to the landfill. That would be the best option because there is no recycling is advocating for that, like making changes and building infrastructure. And my question is towards you that we are aware that like the EU actually started to have farmers to recycle their plastics, and what are your thoughts or like comments on that? That how can the EU help or the US do something like that?
No, it's what you say is super important. You need to create infrastructure that actually makes it possible to do these things. I mean, if you collect the plastic yourself, but then there's nowhere to bring it, then it's an issue. What we've done is to both create the infrastructure, create the finance for it through the polluter pays principle and the extended responsibility, and then also what we are going to do in the near future is to increase the requirements for recycled plastic. So you create a market for the plastic, because that has been explained, it's easier and cheaper to produce virgin plastic to actually recycle. But if the recyclable, not only the recyclability, but the content that is required in a new product. So you say, okay, 30% of this future plastic production has to be recycled. Then you create a market for that plastic to go somewhere and to be a valuable input in the industry. And the other thing that I'm super excited about is that we are, in addition to the producer responsibility, we're going to ask our member states to pay a fee for every ton of plastic that is not recycled. And this has only started in 2021, so I cannot exactly tell you how much we are already getting. And this goes directly into the budget of the European Union. So it serves funding projects that the European Union wants to make in this. So what I read is that the expected income will be 6 billion per year. It's not bad. And that's even giving a discount to some member states that, were not about the measure. And that's by charging our member states $1, 0.8 euros, which is about $1 for every ton of plastic that is not recycled.
And Trey, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I wanted to add a little U.S. flavor to that question, which is that we need to do things at both ends of the market economically in the U.S. So one of the biggest structural problems for anything plastic in the U.S. is that not only do people not know that plastic is oil, but that they don't know that plastic is the cheap alternative because we subsidize plastic indirectly by subsidizing the production of oil and gas in the U.S. And that doesn't just stay in the U.S. That makes plastic cheaper on the global market. And so plastic, if you actually paid for all the things that go into plastic, would not be the cheapest option. Oil and gas are expensive to get. It's just that they're highly valuable to sell. So if you don't subsidize the production of oil and gas, then you cease subsidizing the raw virgin material that goes into plastic. And suddenly recycling plastics and repurposing plastics makes a whole lot more sense, dollars and cents wise. And it's no longer just a policy issue. It's no longer an ethical issue. It is simply economic. And if US taxpayers stopped paying their tax money to subsidize oil and gas private enterprise, plastic would be a whole lot more expensive on the supply end.
How about over here?
First of all, I want to thank all three of you for your intellect, your knowledge, your passion for this issue. Super important. My name is John Oldfield. The hat I'm wearing this evening is the Institute of Maritime History. I have the good fortune of diving in the Potomac River every weekend, looking for submerged cultural inheritance. So thank you for keeping it clean. Never diving in the Anacostia just yet. Question for Trey is, I get if one's fortunate to live near to be under a body of water, what's your secret to attract those who want or have the opportunity to get in the body of water? How do you
You're breaking up a little bit. Can you rephrase that?
I think I've got you. So what's the secret to getting people to care about a river that they haven't seen?
That's exactly my question. Thank you.
And how to get people to take ownership and pride in a river that they didn't realize was their own in their own backyard. Getting them out to cleanups, teaching them how to fish, but maybe catch and release fish because it's not quite good there yet. And again, those boat tours that the district has funded with money from plastic bag fee, that single thing has gotten in 5 years probably 20,000, 10, 15, 20,000 people that hadn't seen their river before on their own river. And when they see it and they realize what a gem it is in their own backyard, it's astonishing. Their eyes literally open wide. And you can see it, and you can see the beginning of that ownership. And it's just astonishing. And when they see the river and how beautiful it is, and the number one thing they see on it is plastic bottles floating down the river, people start to get happy, and then they start to get mad. And mad is good. Mad gets things done.
Right over here.
My name is Mullen Joy Kimball, and I work with the UN Foundation. I also teach at the Maxwell School, Sustainability and Public Policy. And it seems to me underlying its whole challenge is the need for embedding a carbon tax throughout the economy. Because if we don't do that, the oil companies who are losing their direct market will emphasize the production of plastic. And I make this point because many years ago, I worked in the State Department on the Middle East. And to make value added in places like Saudi Arabia, they developed petrochemical markets, which are the building blocks for plastic. So if you don't get a carbon tax in place, if you don't stop subsidizing fossil fuels, much of which you've seen in European Union directives and actions since 1997, you will not change what's going on in the U.S.
The only thing I would add to that is that you are correct. Plastic production is on track to increase and is expected to double by 2040. And to look at it another way, by 2050, which is 100 years after mass production started, we will have produced twice as much plastic in the next 35 years as we did in the first 65. So I'm not going to speak to carbon tax, but there is the issue that is very big, which goes back to do we need all of this food packaging? Do we need to have something triple wrapped in something? Are there ways to reduce the amount of plastic that is used and manufactured?
One of the best ways we've seen to reduce the plastic you want to use and that industries want to use, keep in mind that plastic it's literally new. It's very new. And people are like, well, what else can we use? All the things that we were using 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, there's very few industries where you couldn't go back and look at a product and be like, oh, right, glass didn't work, metal didn't work, twine didn't work, fabric didn't work. There's some like medical waste that makes sense still to keep using plastic. There's some places that are using plastic, which is a long-term material, as a long-term material. But they're all the single use, all the quick use, all the places where you wish it would just go away. There are compostable, like actually backyard compostable, not industrial compostable or worse, chemical recycling compostable materials. There are materials that we used to use as recently as 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it's not like we need to invent something new to do a lot of these jobs. We can just go back to what we were using before.
How many, now wait a minute, how are you guys, because there are a lot of questions out there, but we're pushing our our keepers have told us to keep our eye on the clock. How do you feel about things? Total silence.
My name is Claire Romanic, and I work for the United States.
Who wants to start?
I fully agree with you that there's an issue of capacity and capacity building and also financial, frankly, to develop. I mean, we find the problem in the US or in the EU to develop the systems to collect and to create a market for collection of waste and plastic in particular. Obviously, countries with less financial means will find it even more difficult. And I will come back to the idea of a global plastics treaty that will create also the infrastructure for technical assistance, not only the bilateral technical assistance I'm sure the US and certainly the EU is already providing in this respect, but that there will be a more organized way to provide finance, technical assistance, and to also across the world look at prevention and agree on basic standards for limiting the production of plastic to where it's really needed, and increasing the recyclability of plastic and creating a market for, because perhaps we haven't discussed much today is that a lot of this plastic gets exported. So not all of it gets recycled in the EU, it gets recycled elsewhere, and the same with the US. At some point, as some of you might know, China decided no longer to take plastic for problem for those of us who are exporting it. So I think that's the thing we need to and help these countries and do a better job for all us.
It's interesting that we talk about how we export plastic waste to be recycled elsewhere. The American recycling system didn't shut down like it has until China stopped buying our really just bad plastic. Our plastic has lots of food on it. It's got lots of broken glass in it. We got sold by the plastic industry, the bottling industry, on single stream recycling because it makes it easier to recycle. And so everybody started recycling, and municipalities had no choice but to begin supporting economically through local taxes the cost of recycling. But that recycling all got shipped to China, and they were happy to take it and sift through it until they had enough plastic at home that they could get their own plastic and they could keep it cleaner because they had better control over the supply chain. And when they stopped taking it, our plastic suddenly had way less of a carbon footprint because it only had the carbon footprint to production. It wasn't getting shipped all the way across the Pacific, found to be wanting in quality, and then shipped all the way back only to be burned, which is what was going on. But it's interesting that the plastic has such a long, extended life, and that a lot of those studies, like you talked about, that found Asian rivers to be suffering from the most plastic, those Asian rivers were going through places that had been hired by a local government, which was hired by a foreign government to dispose of plastic for them. It's no accident that plastic was coming out of those rivers into the ocean and into the global waterways, because it's where it had been shipped on purpose. There's some interesting places. There's a Nicoya Peninsula keeper down in Costa Rica that has recently gotten a new bionic yarn. They take all of the marine graded, really degraded maritime plastic that's been in the sun. Before this company came in and started buying the plastic that was showing up on the beaches, the same plastic would get picked up on the beach. It would get picked up by volunteers. It will be carted back into the landfill on the riverside of the peninsula. A big storm would happen. It would pick up the flooding from the landfill, take the plastic back out. The weather would blow it back in, and the plastic was doing its own circular life cycle from just either side of literally the same peninsula. But it's now been an ex-pilot, so there was funding given to it to set up this pilot for bionic yarn. Now there's shirts being made out of it by a company based in the U.S., but it speaks to that need for an economic driver to make companies see the need to start actually using this plastic that's out in the system.
I think we have an online audience, and I think I can't see past this light. Who's handling the questions that have come in? Is there anything online that you want to read out? No?
Ben says not yet.
Not yet? Then I saw some other hands here. I'll take you back in the back, and then we'll go over here.
Hi, I'm Jessie Myler at American University, and I study microplastics. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the sources and controlling the sources. And I heard Mercedes mention the microplastic legislation or regulations that you're considering. Because a lot of the microplastics that we see are coming from, they're secondary microplastics. They are coming and being shed from other plastics. And Trey, you mentioned these products that are being developed from plastics, and that's great to keep it out of landfills. The big but is that it's still staying in circulation, and we're still producing more plastic, and the plastic is still ending up in the environment in smaller and smaller pieces, and so it's affecting our ecosystem. So I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about that, the sources of the plastic. I mean, sorry, you didn't talk about it a little bit, but I'm curious about the legislation.
I'll and I'm sure Trey knows as well. So there's the microplastics that are added to products on purpose. So things like exfoliators, where you have, I'm sure you know more about this, or some of the toothpaste that were. So that's those products where microplastics are actually added. But then there's a lot of products like tires that produce microplastics just because they degrade and they produce smaller plastics that they degrade even in smaller pieces. And then another source that not everybody is aware is textiles, of course. So a lot of the textiles that we use are no longer natural fibers. It's not cotton or wool. It's actually polymers as well. And of course, when that gets washed, and then it also produces microplastics. For that, there's a solution, and there's solutions that have been experimented with filters. You can install certain filters that then prevent those microplastics from going into the rivers and then into the oceans. So there's multiple sources, and we're looking at all of them to see how to better regulate, because they have different issues, of course, and different ways to. For tires, for example, you probably need to design them in a way that they don't degrade like that. For added microplastics, then I guess the best way is to just prevent for those microplastics to be added.
Has the EU done anything about like micro beads in beauty products and everything
Pallets,
else?
you mean? There's the other
for the exfoliants.
Yeah, not yet, but that's one of the things that we're looking into regulating.
We beat you on that one.
Good.
Just wanted to check my facts first. I mean, it's all the same. It's the same plastics. It's the same materials, right? So we got lucky in the U.S. and a Maryland bill to ban microbeads in exfoliants and toothpaste and lotions and shampoos. Why you need that? Lotions, everything else. Actually got picked up and almost immediately, like within I think 6 months, became a federal ban on microbeads in products. And microbeads on purpose as primary microplastics became like the scapegoat for microplastics in the U.S. Congress, and they put it to bed, and they felt like they were done for what has it been, 5 years now, 4 years now, I think. But if you have microplastics questions, the one to be talking to is Dr. Myler, not to us. But everything that you wear that's not natural is plastic, right? So my fleece, plastic. When it gets washed, microplastics. I'm pretty sure this polo is at least 4%, something else that's not cotton. It's actually devastatingly hard to avoid. As a nonprofit, like, what do we give out? Like, what kind of swag can I give you? What kind of logoed wear can we have? It becomes really, really hard to not give away plastics and buy plastics and sell them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead right here.
I was wondering if you could share from the EU perspective how much transparency there is in waste flows, like with what you call recycling, is some of that exported, and how difficult is it for an average citizen there to find out what happens to their waste? Because I know it's very difficult here in the U.S., and if you had any tips to share with the people that are here.
Well, of course, the recycling systems are local, like here in the U.S. And some municipalities do it better, and some do it worse. So it really depends. Like here in the U.S. and in some places, what they do is to charge you for the bags. So that, and that's actually what finances the recycling system. I think what facilitates things a little bit is that generally we don't do, except for aluminum, so aluminum cans and plastic that is usually easier to separate. We don't put the cardboard and paper together with the rest of the recycled items. And cardboard and paper is not recyclable if it's soiled especially by food waste. So already separating better makes recycling easier. So I think I would agree with Trey that changing that, I was actually quite surprised when I go over the recycling system here, where you put everything together, because it's very convenient, but it doesn't lead to good recycling. And in terms of how much gets exported, we're trying to create transparency with that and diminishing that, of course. But a lot of it comes down to what are the systems in your municipality and how well they do the sorting and the end distribution of it and getting it back to the value chain in some cases. I actually happen to know someone who runs a company that buys waste to get it recycled. And one thing that we don't recycle a lot here in the US is oil, cooking oil, and that also goes into the rivers and then produces like soap, and it's very bad for the animals and for the fish, and that is high value. Is actually very high value. It in the future will be used to produce biofuels for planes and ships. So if it's a kind of question of creating a market for it.
Thank you. I think we could sit here and talk all night and don't groan, because I think we're going to wrap this up. There are many, many other topics related to plastic. It's complicated. We've just scratched the surface, and we thank you all for coming and asking questions. And Trey and Mercedes will be around if you want to nab them after this is over. But again, thanks a lot, and good luck trying to convince your friends and neighbors and the companies you buy products from to please pay attention and do something. Thanks.